Hey guys, how's it going? It's right here. So today I want to talk about my solo queue tier list, and this is basically an update for where I think the meta is, where it's headed, and what I've changed so far for my tier list. So of course, as you know, the Valeera patch is coming up soon, and the big changes for that one are Valeera, Rexxar, and Tassadar. And while I think each of those two reworks and Valeera will be pretty influential, and I think they'll all be significant heroes, I don't think it'll change the meta in how it's played. So you might have an extra Tassadar on your team that goes Archon or something, but I don't think that'll really change the meta. So this tier list will pretty much be accurate. Of course, I'll update it when that patch goes live, but for the moment, I don't think you should expect too many changes. So all I'm going to do in this patch video is go over the heroes that have changed, talk about Zul'jin, and pretty much just show you the list and kind of give you a heads up as to why I've changed certain things and give you a little bit more knowledge and depth and insight into the changes than you would see just from reading this. So this is a bit of additional content. Okay, so let's go over Zul'jin and let's talk about Zul'jin. So obviously I've done a Zul'jin video, which you can watch on my YouTube channel. But for those of you that don't know, he's basically a really strong single target DPS hero. But his weaknesses are he has no mobility and he has no wave clear, and he really requires your team a lot of time to be helpful. So Zul'jin is one of those heroes that really needs a support to be effective. Of course, heroes like Vala do as well, but heroes like Tychus don't need as much support. So Zul'jin is a sustained range auto attack hero, and he can just do that. Single target sustained range is what he does, and he doesn't really do anything else. He doesn't have really any utility. He doesn't have any other function. He doesn't have AoE. He just does single target damage. So that is a pretty big drawback. He does this single target damage really well, but that just makes him a little bit more niche. So that's why he's only at tier 2. He's not at a higher tier. So when he's in his specific role, he has a really good draft around him. He's on a good map that's suited for him, and you're against a team that works well. He's a very strong pick, and he could be the best pick for your team. Uh, but most of the time, he's not going to be the best pick for your team, and most of the time, you're just better going for Vala or Tychus because Tychus does single target damage as well, but he also shreds tanks. He's a lot harder to kill. He has utility. He has a much more impactful heroic ability, and he does other things that Zul'jin can't do. So in general, Tychus is probably a better version of Zul'jin, even though Zul'jin does better single target damage. Obviously, Zul'jin is a brand new hero. I haven't played him that much. Personally, like I've played with him on a team. I have played him obviously, but he's probably gonna change. I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe went to tier 1, maybe went to tier 3. But I don't think he'd be tier S. So Artanis got a big change recently, or not necessarily a big change, but I guess people have finally realized his full potential. And I can't believe Artanis has gone from the worst hero in the game to the best hero in the game, and that is because of his swaps. So swaps are incredibly annoying to deal with. There's pretty much no counterplay, and it makes him a better Stitches. He's just straight up a better Stitches because not only can he swap a hero, which is basically a Stitches hook, he is way more impactful in team fights, and he will actually win team fights for you where Stitches will do like negligible amount of damage. Artanis is actually a huge threat, and he's good in pretty much any comp, any map. Both of his ults are good, but usually you take the blind. And he's just a very scary hero to play against. Basically, one swap late game can turn the fight, especially if you get the double swap at 13. If you double swap on backline, it's basically an insta-one fight just from getting that swap off. And it's not that hard to get the swap off. It's just a huge threat at all points in the game. And I would expect Artanis will get nerfed very soon. Maybe they just increase the cooldown of his swap or make it more visible. I don't know. But I would expect an Artanis nerf. For the time being, I ban him personally. I just don't. I think he's too annoying to deal with. I think he's too easy to play, and I just think that it's the threat of the swap is just too high. So he's not only I personally permaban him in Hero League, but he's also permaban permapicked in competitive play. So Diablo was tier S, and he got significant nerfs to several parts of his kit, and that's going to knock him down a little bit. And because of those nerfs, he's not quite as taxing, but he's still very tanky, very hard to kill. But as many people probably realize, once he loses his stacks, he is very easy to kill, and he's not as impactful, especially if you go those stacking talents for his passive. So so I've seen people not going the stacking talents, and that makes him considerably less tanky and easier to kill. That's also kind of lowered his tier level a little bit because he's a little bit easier to deal with. The fact that you can actually kill him now means you can reset his stacks, and he's more manageable to deal with. He's still really strong, and as you'll see in the tier list, he's still highly rated, but He's not quite as overwhelming as he was before. Thrall also got huge nerfs, maybe the biggest nerfs. The cooldown on his Earthquake is increased from 60 to 100. That is a huge nerf. I can't think of a nerf to a single ability that's been bigger than that. A 40-second increase cooldown is absolutely massive, and it really hits him hard. He's of course still a viable pick. He's still strong. He's still one of the best solo winners in the game. He's still impactful in team fights, and Earthquake does pretty much the same thing in team fights that it did before. So once you actually use it in team fight, it's the same. It's just the cooldown is a bit longer, and you can't use it quite as often as you could before. So I thought maybe they'd nerf it by 20 seconds or something and do something else, but nope, they nerfed it by 40 seconds, and I think it's a deserved nerf. So Thrall still good, but he's no longer tier S. I've increased ETC from tier 1 to tier 2, and the reason I had them below, so I had ETC and Murden in tier 2 before. Murden's still there, but I feel like EDC is definitely better than Mirrodin, at least in the current meta. And I think that having him increase to tier 1 kind of reflects that. So the reason, of course, ETC is one of the best heroes in the game. Everyone knows this, but the reason he's not like tier S or anything is because he can't do anything by himself. Okay, he has no damage. If you stun a target, you have to rely on your team to actually finish them off. And other tanks like Diablo actually have DPS in their kit. They have harder stuns in their kit. They have harder engage in their kit. Um, and other tanks can just kind of do more. They can wave clear or something, and ETC can't wave clear till later in the game. And split pushing with stage dive is not good in Hero League because your team will just fight for no reason in a 4v5 and get wiped, and they'll be like, "Where's ETC?" And you're like, "Oh, I was split pushing," and it doesn't really work out. So ETC tier one, he's always been good. I just thought I'd buff him a little bit. So Tyrael is really good in this meta. He's always been really good, but he's really good in this meta, especially versus all these tanks. He's really good because you have all these melee heroes that really benefit from Tyrell's movement speed. And Tyrell is one of the few tanks that really has, well, he has the most mobility of any tank in the game, perhaps even the most mobility of any hero in the game. Um, that might be pushing it, but he definitely has a ton of mobility, and he's one of the few tanks that can actually dive heroes with ease. So when you're having a lot of tanks, the sanctification is really, really strong because you can just burn sank when you're in the middle of the fight, and enemy team can't kill all of your tanks, and you can move in speed, and you can just use the utility for your allies to initiate. So he's really, really strong in this meta. Dahaka got of course got massive buffs in a recent patch. But since the patch has gone on, even though he got some nerfs, a little bit of tiny nerfs, he's still insanely good, really strong, adaptations amazing. And again, in this meta where they have so many melee heroes on their team, you can use Dahaka and just use Symbiosis at level 7, and you just walk in their team, and you can basically have, if you're hitting two targets, you can pretty much permanently have your W off of cooldown. You'll do a ton of damage, and his utility is good. Um, Having Dahaka as one of your tanks is like the best thing ever because he can just split soak and his wave clear is amazing. So he's just a really, really, really strong hero. Rhaegar got buffs. The buffs that Rhaegar got to his autos in a previous patch is still really strong. So even though they nerfed Bloodlust in the most recent patch, it was only by a couple of seconds, only a tiny bit of a nerf, and he's still a really strong hero. I think he's one of the few supports that can actually carry games. So Malfurion is just a really strong support overall, but Rhaegar can actually solo camps and he can actually kind of do damage to players. So he's just, um, even though he might not be as effective in team fights as Malfurion, that's arguable. But even let's say that's true, he still has a lot of utility elsewhere on the map because he can solo merc camps. He's really good at soloing waves. He can actually solo kill heroes pretty effectively. And he's just a really good independent support, which is what you really want. Like heroes like Ariel, supports like Ariel, really rely on your team to do what they need to do. But heroes like Rhaegar, Malfurion are a little bit more independent. And that's what you want to look for in Hero League. Gul'dan's been lowered because of how many tanks there are in the meta, and Gul'dan is just not good versus tanks because the sustained damage is not good versus tanks, and he's too immobile versus if you have like the ETC stage dive, if you have the Dahaka dig, the Diablo engage, the Tyrael engage, and everything else, the Artana swap, all this dive is not good for Gul'dan, so I've lowered him a little bit for that. I still obviously wouldn't pick Gul'dan on big maps like Cursed Hollow or Battlefield of Eternity or something like that. But I still think, but he's really good on rotation-based maps. So just obviously keep that in mind that just because a hero's tier one doesn't mean um, you should pick them on all maps, even though you could. Obviously, some heroes will always be better on some maps. Samuro has been lowered because people have finally learned that hey, you can just kill the clones. Well, maybe they haven't learned, but it's a little less significant as it was before. So there is a bit of counterplay to Samuro. Um, or people are taking advantage of the counterplay a little bit more than it was previously. Nazebo, I think I just had him a little bit too high up before, and he's just not good in this meta at all versus these double tanks, or triple tanks, or all this front line. Just not too good for him because he doesn't have mobility. Tassadar is really good because he enables a lot of heroes, and he's good versus a lot of tanks if you have a hard carry on your team. Because if you have like a Vol on your team, if you have a Zul'jin on your team, and Zul'jin's one of the reasons he's been raised because Tas works really well with Zul'jin. And having like Task Wall is really effective at splitting a lot of melee heroes. Stitches of Lord because thinking about it, Artanis is better Stitches, and it just makes me realize how bad Stitches is right now. He has pretty much no utility whatsoever. All he has is his hook, and he has very low damage. He has very low impact in fights. You're basically just doing very, very, very sustained low damage in team fights, and the only thing you bring is hook. Maybe you bring Gorge. That's it. You bring nothing else. There's just nothing in his kit to do anything. So Stitches needs some kind of changes or some kind of huge buffs. I just think he's one of the worst heroes in the game right now, unfortunately, because I love Stitches. I have Master Skin of Stitches. I love playing him. I remember the old days when he was the best hero in the game, but these days he's just far from it. So let's look at the actual tier list. We have Artanis, Rehgar, Vala, Malfurion. So the changes here are Thrall and Diablo were in S tier, but they've been nerfed, so they've been lowered. I still think Rag is pretty much he's personally my favorite hero in the game. I don't know if it's the most optimal hero for you to play personally, but I think Rag is one of the best heroes, so I'll always pick him. And I think that's because of his wave clear. I think because of Molten Core. I think because of his ultimate, and he just has so much impact on the game. Like I just love heroes like Rag who have so much impact on the game. Like Artanis is gonna win you a lot of team fights, right? And those swaps are really impactful to catch people out. But Rag just does so much, right? So you can molten core to push, you can molten core to flank. You can almost one hit a hero with Sulfurous Smash. You can wave clear insanely hard. You can push really hard. You can solo camps. You can poke pretty well. You can help your allies speed them in and out. So he just has a lot that he can do, and he can do so much. That's why I value him so much. And I think that even in competitive, he's finally seeing play as he deserves. Vala still, I think, the best hero, the best DPS hero in the game. Uh, so even though there's Zul'jin, there's a lot more tanks. Vala is still the mobility and the high damage that Vala has makes her so strong because mobility is what you need when you're trying to kill these tanks. Raw damage and mobility, and just there's no other heroes in the game that can really do that. I think she's better than Tychus because she has a lot more push, she has a lot more wave clear, and Tychus just doesn't have that. He's really just single target damage. So for tier one, we have pretty much the typical heroes. I don't think you'd be surprised by any of the heroes in this tier. I think that's pretty standard. And of course, so moving on here, we have Dahaka is really strong, Rehgar. So you see, and you notice a lot of these heroes are kind of independent. So like Zeratul doesn't need a team, Thrall doesn't need a team, Rehgar doesn't need a team, Dahaka doesn't need a team. Like you can do things very independently. I think that's the running theme through tier one. And as you get to tier two, we see like Morales needs allies, Kerrigan kind of needs allies, Jaina, Chromie, you need setup from your allies. Hammer, you need setup from your allies. Lost Vikings, you need setup from your allies. So if you look at like Falstad, he can just split soak and fly in Gus, save your allies. I think ETC is really the maybe ETC Gul'dan are kind of the odd ones out here in the sense that they need kind of follow up from your team more than the rest of the heroes. Maybe you could say the same for Diablo, but you know Chen, Zarya, Tychus, Alarak, Tyrael, those are really just a lot of independent heroes that they have a lot of mobility, a lot of escapes, a lot of kind of second chances. And if you the lower and lower you get here, the more niche and niche it gets. So like Greymane, it's hard to go in because you just get killed. Zagara just doesn't have a lot of impact in fights. Um, Lily, you're basically just casting abilities on cooldown. You don't control really what you do. You just hope that spamming blinds helps your allies, just spamming dragons. And that's kind of the running theme through this tier list. So if you want more information, you can always tweet me about it. You can always ask me questions. I'm always open to that. And I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I'll talk to you next time.